Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Behind me is 16 Rowan Road, Hammersmith. This used to be called Cornwall Road, and I'm filming this house because this is where James Leigh Hunt lived, just known as the Leigh Hunt. They didn't use his Christian name very much, who was a well-known early 19th century writer and radical. So Leigh Hunt, he was born in Southgate. Southgate was in Middlesex then, a village some way north of London, now we consider very much part of London, into a family that belonged to the Religious Society of Friends. They're commonly called the Quakers. So his parents had both been born in the United States. Well, it wasn't the United States back then, Pennsylvania, and they'd fled after the American Revolution because they had been loyalists. So his father was a lawyer, and so they were a solidly middle-class family. Bear in mind, this is a time when a lot of people didn't get to read and write at all. So he went to Christ's Hospital, which is a school somewhere to the south of London in the countryside of Sussex. It had a tradition of, I suppose, educating people who turned out to have rather alternative opinions. So he suffered a severe speech impediment at the time, though he later overcame that. And indeed he became known as Orator Hunt for his fantastic skills at public speaking. He didn't go on to university, partly because university exams in those days were all oral and in Latin. So there were very few universities at the time. Certainly in England there was Oxford, Cambridge. Well, he was a bit beyond university age when they founded University College London and all that. So he moved in London literary circles, and he spent his time reading and writing, and he published a volume of verse entitled Juvenalia, as in the works of youth. Well, he wrote it in English, despite the title being in Latin. But educated people were all fairly good at Latin. That was really the core of education for the better sort of school. So he was friends with Percy Bysshe Shelley, with John Keats, knew Lord Byron slightly. So he embraced the whole gamut of radical opinions. He disliked the monarchy, he thought there ought to be no religious discrimination, he wanted the abolition of slavery, things like that. He felt that the war against France wasn't worth fighting. There was very little moral difference between Napoleonic France and Hanoverian Britain. So he largely socialised with people of a similar mindset, though I don't think he actually went so far as to be a pacifist. And right after the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815 was a time of great agitation. A lot of demobilised soldiers, the Corn Laws came in, which kept the price of corn and therefore bread artificially high. The government was intervening in the market to tilt things towards the very wealthy, which of course the masses didn't like. Then the Peterloo massacre ensued. So he went for an extended trip to Italy, a sort of a late grand tour, and indeed he was with Shelley when Shelley drowned, and attended his funeral when his body was burnt on the beach at Viareggio in Italy. So thereafter he returned to this country. He got himself into trouble during the Napoleonic Wars. It was the Prince Regent's birthday, Prince Regent being George IV, and this was celebrated, and Leigh Hunt published this scurrilous attack on the Prince Regent, saying in his half-century of life he's done nothing to make us one bit grateful. And so that was criminal libel. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though I think he was let out rather early. So this idea that there was freedom of expression in this country is somewhat overblown. It was quite seriously restricted by a lot of legislation at the time. The definition of sedition was broadened considerably to really hamper radicals' ability to inveigh against the government and to persuade people to push for major reform. So he was the longest lived of this generation of romantic poets, longer than Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who lived just over a mile from here. Anyway, he lived on till 1858, and he was also a libertine, believing in free love. His son Thornton became editor of the Daily Telegraph, which may seem to be deeply ironic, considering the Telegraph, the Tory graph, is the main organ of conservative opinion in this country. The Telegraph, it was a liberal paper initially. Well, it was only founded the year after Leigh Hunt died. Perhaps it would have killed him. Well, that's Leigh Hunt, a figure who ought to be more widely read about.